What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm Dr. Achina Stein, your host, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Amie Hornaman, a.k.a. the Thyroid-Fixer. She's a woman on a mission to optimize thyroid patients around the world. She is a doctor of clinical nutrition turned functional medicine practitioner and thyroid expert, helping women get their lives back and allowing them to show up every day of their life as their best badass superhuman self. If you enjoy this episode, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Welcome, Dr. Amie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so glad that we finally connected. We've been trying to do this for a while. So why don't you start off with your own struggles? I know that you've been so passionate about that. And a lot of times, you know, when we go through something, that's what really drives the passion. I know you told me that you had 6 misdiagnoses in the past. Can you dive into that right now?
Absolutely. So I think many of us in this space, when we're helping others, it's been from our own pain to purpose story. Right. So when I rewind 20 some years ago, in my 20s, I was competing in figure competitions and doing fitness modeling. And so you really had to diet down. And I come from a family not of skinny minis. I come from a family of obesity and type 2 diabetes, and I'm only 5'2". So I would always have to work my butt off to get to that shape to step on stage or be in front of the camera in a bikini. And it was fun. I love the challenge. I'm type A, you know, give me that next challenge and let me drive toward that. And even just battling being the fat kid when I was younger, that challenge always gave me something to do with my body and make it better and achieve something else. Well, there was this one show that I was getting ready for, and I knew how my body was supposed to respond. I had done it a million times before. And this one particular show, I start gaining weight instead of losing. Now, biologically, for any practitioners listening, we know, calories in, calories out don't matter. But let's face it, if you're eating broccoli and chicken and asparagus and fish and going to the gym twice a day, you should be losing, not gaining.
Right.
And so when that scale hit 20 plus pounds, I actually stopped weighing myself. So I don't know how much weight I actually put on because it started really affecting my mental state.
Right.
And I definitely slipped into a depression. I was losing my hair. I was tired, and we know fatigue and depression go hand in hand. So it was really bad. And I went to 6 different doctors, and all of them told me, you're normal, you're fine. Eat less and exercise more, which my jaw dropped when the one doctor said that because it wasn't even possible. And I remember crying in my car, just head on the steering wheel, face down, just crying because I wanted there to be something wrong with me so that I could fix it or somebody could fix it.
Right.
Because this wasn't making sense. We all know our bodies when there's something off.
Right. Yeah. And how many years ago was this?
I can't even count. 25, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a long time ago.
Right. Right.
So, it was still in the age of gateway computers, right? So I could, the big box computer, so I could still look things up. And after that, well, the six doctors misdiagnosed me. One doctor diagnosed me, right? So she touched my throat. She said, swallow. She goes, you have nodules on your thyroid. And did some tests, and I can't remember whether she labeled me Hashimoto's or not back then, but she put me on a pill. And that was the awesome thing, because I thought at that time, now I have a medication, now things are going to change.
Right.
And they didn't. 5 months later, no change, not 1 pound, nothing. Right. The depression was still there. The fatigue was still there. I was still losing hair. I was still gaining weight. So I do some research on the gateway computer.
Right.
And I go back to her and I say, well, there's this thing called T3, because I was given T4, like most people are, Synthroid, Levo, T4, here you go. And I said, there's this thing called T3. Apparently it works really well. Like, that's the active thyroid hormone. How about we use some of that? She goes, I don't do that. I go, well, I'm going to find somebody who does. That's when I found functional medicine. And my mentor, who was still my mentor, saved my life at that time and literally changed my career path, because he did so much for me, the right testing, the right medication, the right supplements, the right nutrition plan, did the whole thing, looking at everything. And he changed my life so much that he basically put me on the path of functional medicine and getting my doctorate in clinical nutrition and just being able to give back to others what I needed so badly at the time, which was hope and direction.
Right.
And so that's why I'm here in this space, giving back.
Right, right. So just so people don't run out and get themselves on T3, right?
Right.
I want to caution people that like, just because that, it worked for Dr. Amie doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should then suddenly be put on T3. I think it's important to do a workup. Right. And also to look at other factors. So what were some of the other things that were going on in your life that were also contributing to this issue? So you mentioned functional medicine and looking for root causes. What were some of the root causes?
Well, the other thing that was really interesting was as we were doing all the testing and looking for the root cause. I remember one day, very much in the beginning, one day I went in to see my functional doctor, and I said, "What is this now? Now I'm breaking out. What's going on?" And I'm starting to gain weight again, and I was finally losing weight. He goes, "You have PCOS." Because we can test you for it if you want to do a vaginal ultrasound, but I can look at you and tell you and your insulin's high and your progesterone's low and your testosterone's a little bit elevated. And your estrogen dominant. So we could see all the ties in. And knowing what I know now and kind of looking back at myself, I know that high insulin causes inflammation. That causes weight gain as well. And that impairs T4 to T3 conversion. Right. So we can kind of get into the mechanism if you want, but high insulin is really bad. High estrogen will shut down thyroid function. So if you're estrogen dominant, the estrogen dominance in and of itself will cause water retention and weight gain, but it will also suppress the thyroid and interfere with T4 to T3 conversion. So there was a lot going on. Progesterone being low. Progesterone is our calming hormone. So no wonder I was depressed and anxious and just agitated and bitchy all the time because I had no progesterone in my 20s. I had the progesterone of a postmenopausal woman. Right. So all of those factors combined really kind of contribute. They all work together, right? Because everything is so beautifully connected. Everything was working together to really screw up my body.
Right. So did you find that it was that caused the thyroid problem, or was the thyroid problem that caused all of the sex hormones to be off?
It's funny you asked that. So just even back then, I don't believe that we tested for Epstein-Barr virus. I just tested myself, just for giggles because I test everybody else. I tested myself just a few months ago and I'm like, oh, look, there it is. So I am positive for Epstein-Barr. It is not in the active phase. It's dormant, as most people are. Right. But that's a huge contributor to Hashimoto's. We know that. And then if you combine that, we know that Hashimoto's turns on with a stressor usually. So we see it in perimenopause, pregnancy. A lot of women will be like, yeah, my second kid, boom, everything went to hell. So my stressor was what I was doing to myself. I was over exercising. I was under eating. And that was enough stress. And like I said, I had done multiple shows, multiple photo shoots to where my body finally said, that's enough. Flip the switch. So that turned on my Hashimoto's, which then started that cascade. And I'm sure my hormones were wonky before, but it wasn't until the Hashimoto's presented itself. And then we know the thyroid's the master gland. So then it starts messing with all the hormones and with your insulin. Who knows what came first?
Right. It's sometimes
I think I always had that genetic predisposition for Hashi, and I just flipped the switch with the stressors.
Right. Exactly. So let's back up a little bit because we just really jumped in.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Just so people, I know. That's why you're so much fun.
It's passionate. It's passion.
Yeah. So so people understand what we're talking about. The thyroid is a gland that's right here. It's right above it's called the Adam's apple, but people call the Adam's apple. And we can, from behind, at least what I do is palpate from behind the thyroid gland to see the size and see if there's any lumps and things. And I call it the thermostat of the body, or it basically tells the body and all the organs even on the micro level, about how quickly the metabolism should be, how slow or how fast. I mean, that's the simplest explanation, but it can affect every organ of your body, including your brain. And it is a major cause, actually a very major, well-known cause, even in the conventional, traditional world, of depression. And, many people, the reason I really wanted you to be on here is because many people who come to me have come to me for, because they're treated for depression with medications, and they're not getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a whole medical workup hasn't even been done, not even a basic workup. I have a 19-year-old who's in my practice. She has all the symptoms of hypothyroidism, and nobody had done, but not in the hospital. She had been hospitalized, not in the hospital, not by her family doctor, not by her psychiatrist. And like she has a therapist too. And so I find that that doesn't even get looked at. And that is a major root cause. And just so that the audience knows that is part of the standard of care. You have to rule out medical causes before you even give a diagnosis, a psychiatric diagnosis. And so you can give a psychiatric diagnosis while you're doing a medical workup, but it should really be preliminary. And then the root cause needs to be addressed by whatever it is you find. And so there's a whole list of medical issues that are well known in the conventional world and should be addressed. And that I find, unfortunately, less and less, that happens less and less in our country specifically. Maybe it's not the case in other countries, but definitely we're in my practice environment in Rhode Island. So I don't know if you find that to be the case where you are.
Yeah, it's actually, I feel like it's a medical crime at this point, because 100% of the patients that I see, the ball has been dropped on them and they have not had a full workup. They've been given the Band-Aid medications, and never has anyone paid attention to their symptoms, looked at them as more than just a lab value, or even done the proper labs to pair up with their symptoms. So it's something I'm very passionate about. I get a little bit fired up. I get on my soapbox.
Yeah.
Because it's like you said, standard of care has gone out the window for time. You have 5 to 7 minutes per your insurance company with your doctor. Right. They don't have the time to look for the root cause. They don't have the time to look to see if your numbers are normal or flagged, or how the numbers pair up together, how they pair up with you as a person and your symptoms. Right. They have time to write you a Band-Aid script.
Right.
So that's what I
so yeah. So there are going to be some medical providers who do actually do some testing. Unfortunately, yes, it's not enough. The most common test, if it is done, is called the TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. And that is a test that tells whether or not the brain is communicating to the thyroid. And that's the only thing that they test for. But there's other tests. Why don't you tell us what the other tests are that are really important to do with the TSH, not the TSH alone. So what are those other tests?
So the other tests I love to see, because TSH could be in the normal, air quote, normal range, or it could even be in the functional optimal range. And yet still someone can have a thyroid problem, because we want to actually look at the thyroid hormone. So like you said, TSH is from the pituitary gland. It's your brain speaking to your thyroid. And as the brain senses that there's not really enough thyroid hormone going on, it will start to yell at the thyroid, like, hey, thyroid, wake up, do your job, make some more thyroid hormone. But then we have to go down and test what are the thyroid hormone levels in the body, specifically the free ones. So I like looking at free T4. T4 is the storage hormone. We do not have receptor sites on our cells for T4. We only have receptor sites on our cells for T3. So we want to test the free T4 though, because we want to see how much thyroid hormone you have in storage that maybe will convert over to the active form T3. So then we test free T3. That is your active thyroid hormone. That's what binds to the cells. And you, like you were saying, Dr. Achina, the brain has more T3 receptor sites on it than any other organ. So when people come to you and they're like, yeah, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I have brain fog, I can't concentrate, I feel like I'm getting early Alzheimer's, the brain needs T3 to function. So we want to see how much of that active thyroid hormone is in your body ready to be taken up by the cells.
Right.
And then we also want to test reverse T3 because that's the anti-thyroid hormone. And I know a lot of people are frustrated because they ask their doctor for reverse T3. They hear me talk about the importance of it and they get a big old no. If you get a no to any of this testing, that is a sign that it's time to find a new doctor, because a doctor should want to, whoever you're working with, nurse practitioner, doctor, it doesn't matter, should want to see that whole picture. And if they poo-poo a test, it's because they don't know what to do with it when it comes back. So you want to move on and find somebody that knows what to do with a full thyroid panel. And reverse T3, if that's elevated, I love giving analogies, right? So it's like the bouncer outside of your cell. It's the bouncer outside of the bar. And he's pointing to T3 going, you can't come in and you can't come in and you can't come in either. And he's preventing T3 from getting to that receptor site on the cell, whether it's in your brain, whether it's in your mitochondria that produce energy to give you a metabolism, to grow your hair, to strengthen your nails, to help you poop. All of that is reliant upon T3. So we need to know what your free T3 level is, and we need to know how many bouncers you have with reverse T3. And then we need to know about your antibodies. So we talked about Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is the autoimmune form of hypothyroidism. It's when you have this group of soldiers, here comes another analogy. You have this group of soldiers that they are confused and they think that your thyroid gland is the enemy. And we can't blame, we're seeing such an increase in autoimmune these days. And that's another rabbit hole, another podcast, but we're seeing an increase in autoimmune. So we need to test, and there are two, by the way, because a lot of docs will only test one. There are two tests for Hashimoto's: thyroglobulin antibodies and thyroid peroxidase antibodies. So we want to test both, and we want to see, are there any antibodies? And if there are, and here's where a lot of practitioners will fail, they will look to see, and it depends on the lab too. So the lab, let's say, will give a standard normal range of less than 20, less than 40. And let's say you come in at an 18. That does not mean that you don't have Hashimoto's. It means you have 18 soldiers that just haven't built up their army enough to actually be flagged on the test. You still have 18 soldiers going out beating up your thyroid. So to me, that is Hashimoto's. To standard medicine, you're not there yet until you're further along in the destruction of your thyroid.
Well, but they're in conventional medicine, though, even if you did have antibodies, many conventional doctors don't even think that that's a problem, either, because we're just going to watch it and see if it expresses itself to symptoms, because some people do have a thyroid panel done, and antibodies are added for whatever reason. And it doesn't, it just gets ignored. And it's like, well, you don't have all the symptoms. You just have a low thyroid. And maybe that explains X, Y, and Z, but you don't have, so it's odd. I think it's more common with things like lupus, where people have ANA antibodies to the anti-nuclear antibodies. And because they're not having any symptoms, then you don't have it. And that's not really the case. It's just a matter. And it does take about 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years before an autoimmune disease expresses it or is manifested. And it's because it gets triggered at some point. And so it's best to address it before it gets to that point. So if you do have antibodies, it's really important to think, okay, I have an autoimmune process going on. And if you do have an autoimmune process going on in your thyroid, you're absolutely going to have an autoimmune process in other areas of your body. You just don't have the test to prove it.
Right.
So there is a process going on that needs to be reversed. And that is really what's most important. I can't tell you how many people I see that have had an autoimmune panel done. And it's like, oh, they're all low levels. They didn't give me a diagnosis, but you have this. I was like, you still have something.
I know. I see that all the time. And
Yeah.
what really cracks me up is when like mom has Hashimoto's, aunt has Hashimoto's, sister has Hashimoto's, there's MS and lupus in the family. And then they tell the patient, you're fine. I'm like, wait a minute. There's so much autoimmune in her family. Like there's no way she doesn't have Hashimoto's when she's presenting with all of the symptoms of hypothyroidism. Like, let's
test it. Yes, exactly. Let's test it. And so, and at least we can head it off at the pass before it really does get to a point where it's completely out of control. So what was weird for me when I was in medical school, I actually had my thyroid tested and it was the TSH was elevated. And what's wild is that somebody accidentally ordered antibodies. And this was my family doctor, right? Accidentally. It's like, oh, we must have checked off a box that we didn't check off. Well, what does it mean? Well, so they sent me to the endocrinologist, and of course, and he was a great guy, one of the experts in our area. I looked up to him, and I actually was at the time was going to be an endocrinologist before I decided to switch to psychiatry. And he basically said, well, they're low, we'll just watch it, and this was back in 1986. And then I had my third child in 1999, and I had full-blown Hashimoto's. And this was after also having Epstein-Barr virus. So I had pregnancy, postpartum, Epstein-Barr virus, and then boom, Hashimoto's. So classic. Like how many years was that, right? That's a lot of years to go by. It was brewing all along, and, when I look back, it explains a lot of the symptoms that I had that were low level, but it didn't come to the point where I just didn't feel good, that I kind of, attributed it to stress of being in medical school and college and or just having babies, right? So it was, basically functioning, but not optimal. And you don't realize it's a problem until it starts going lower and lower and lower and lower, your ability to function. Then you think, oh my gosh, what's going on with me? And a couple of triggers made it happen. It just triggered it. So I always wonder, like, gosh, if I did something then, what are all the things that I could have accomplished I'm pretty high functioning, but what are the things that I could have accomplished if I addressed those issues then when I was in my 20s, right?
Yep. I just had a patient yesterday in her 20s. And I said, you are so lucky that we are catching it now. The antibodies are present. The hormones are starting to go wonky. The insulin is sky high, but yet it's fixable. And we're catching it now because her mother has Hashi, and she was also a patient of mine. So she knew the signs and symptoms. How many 20-year-olds like yourself go decades and don't really know that they even have it, or that anything is wrong in their body, and they're self-shaming and they're blaming and they're embarrassed with how they look, but no one's giving them an answer until they do hit their 30s and have a baby. And then it's like, oh, okay. Now we see that your antibodies are in the hundreds. So now we can do something. It's like, no, let's catch it way back in the beginning in stage 1, 2, 3 of Hashimoto's. And then that way, if we catch it early enough, we can push down those antibodies. We can stop the destruction of your thyroid gland, and you may even protect yourself from other autoimmune conditions, because just like you said, where we see one, we see more than one. Autoimmune begets autoimmune. Right. So if we catch it early enough, you can protect yourself from it moving, from those soldiers finding something else in your body to attack. If it's your joints, you got RA. If it's your small intestine, now you have celiac. If it's your gut, then you have Crohn's. Right. Hair, alopecia. So we don't want that. We don't want more conditions and symptoms that we have to deal with. Let's catch it early.
Right, right. So can you talk about what it is that it is causing this issue of attacking organs, how your immune system is selecting different organs? It's the same process. And what are some of the things that the body decides to attack the thyroid versus the joints versus other tissues?
Well, the thyroid gland seems to be like, I always call it the favorite spot.
Yeah.
It's the favorite spot that soldiers like to go to, especially if you have it in your family, and especially if you're a woman. So with our fluctuating hormones, we just have a tendency for our bodies to attack our thyroid glands. And a lot of that is like estrogen dominant. A lot of that is hormonally driven. That's why we see a lot of Hashimoto's present itself after, we always say the 3 Ps: puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we'll see Hashimoto's present itself. But then we can layer on top of that lifestyle and dietary factors. So we know that when you eat gluten, we know, this is not a fad. This is not a theory.
Right.
We know for a fact that when you eat gluten, you are actually spurning, you're kind of instigating that autoimmune attack. And we also believe that you build your soldiers. So those antibodies can increase each time you expose yourself to gluten. And then they also, I always call it your soldiers, you're building your army, and then the doors open and they are allowed to go out and start a war. So that's every single time you eat gluten, you're building your squadron, and they're going out and starting a war each and every time. So every time you eat gluten, your soldiers that are keyed in on your thyroid gland, they attack it, they dwindle it to nothing. Now they got to find somewhere else to go. They have, because they are auto attackers. It's autoimmune. It means self-attacking, basically. So they're going to find somewhere else to go and something else to attack. As you continue to eat the gluten, you continue to build more soldiers. They need to go other places once they're done beating the hell out of your thyroid gland and destroying it. So that's one key component. We know that stress, and there's different forms of stress, right? I said my stress was over exercising and over dieting, and my calories were too low. That's a stressor on the body. But then there's basic day-to-day stress. There's family stress, marriage stress, relationship stress, kid stress, money stress. Now we have a pandemic stress. We have loss of job stress. And then you have the environmental toxin stress. So all that Bath and Body Works that you're putting on, the candles that you're lighting, the Glade plugins, the stuff that you're spraying, that is sprayed on our food, whether we want it to be or not, and the food that you're eating, those are all toxic burdens, and that's a toxic stress. So think of all the stressors that I just said. Now pile them on top of one another. That burden is on your body. That also triggers autoimmune. That also tells your soldiers to go out and attack. We have things coming at us from so many different angles. It's actually a wonder that not everyone has autoimmune. Maybe they do, and we just haven't tested them all. But it's a problem. It's a problem. Our lifestyle and dietary habits contribute for sure.
So so let's back up a little bit, because you mentioned a lot of things. Going back to why certain organs are attacked. There is also pathogens that play a part. We mentioned Epstein-Barr virus a little while ago. You noticed that you had it on your lab's results recently, and I noticed them a while ago. But the reason certain pathogens trigger a autoimmune process is called molecular mimicry. And so there are parts of the cell wall that mimic. So your body wants to get rid of the pathogen, and there's parts of the cell wall that mimic parts of your body. So Epstein-Barr virus is connected to thyroid problems. We have a bacteria called Prevotella that mimics cartilage or joint tissue. And so nowadays they're actually finding that there is a connection between certain types of bacteria and bacterial colonizations that your body's trying to remove and get rid of. And their cell walls mimic certain tissues. And so there's a lot of research now being done about that and connecting that. And what molecular mimicry is, it's sort of like friendly fire. If your body's at war with something, there's situations when we're at war that you sometimes end up shooting your own, soldiers by
Yeah.
accident. It's not meant to be, you don't want to kill your own soldiers, but it happens, because they kind of look the same or something,
Yeah. Yep.
So I think it's important for people to know that. And then there's the issue of, and the way that happens is due to increased gut permeability or leaky gut. And we talk about this a lot on this show, but leaky gut is caused by gluten, which is why gluten is so important. It opens it opens those gates in the gut lining that then allows for these pathogens to get through, as well as other things like toxins. And so that's how gluten is connected to this whole thing, in terms of causing an autoimmune process. And these are things that you can absolutely reverse if you catch it early enough, so addressing foods that are inflammatory, removing toxins and stress, like you mentioned, but also looking at where are there pathogens that are causing colonization in certain areas of your body, and particularly at the gut lining in the gut, and removing them, and then doing what you need to do to close those gates and heal the gut lining, so that there's better surveillance and a stronger immune system, because 80% of your immune system is at your gut lining.
Right, exactly. And in addition to, so gluten is all around bad. We know that it causes the tight junctions to be permeable. So toxins, antigens can get through, just like you talked about, a leaky gut. But we also know that gluten is a molecular mimicker to the thyroid. So when you eat gluten, your soldiers go, hey, there's an invader. And they go out and they start attacking the gluten, and they naturally attack your thyroid. So that's why it really does spur on that Hashimoto's attack more than anything else, more than any other autoimmune condition. It has a molecular mimicry to thyroid tissue.
Right.
And then if you want to add another layer, you were talking about pathogens, parasites. So parasites can actually be on any organ, any tissue, anything. We know that parasites can be anywhere in your body. Very hard to test for, not impossible, hard to, because even if we do a GI map, we're only seeing the parasites that are in your stool if they're present. So we know that parasites also have a molecular mimicry. So when they attach to your thyroid gland, again, the soldiers are going out and going, oh my God, it's an invader. And they go right for it and they start attacking. And when we're saying attacking, we literally can see on an ultrasound changes in the thyroid gland itself, and the tissue becomes ragged and destroyed. And naturally, I always tell people, listen, if I come and beat you up every day, are you going to do your job well? Are you going to be a good employer, a good employee, a good mom, a good wife, a good husband, a good dad? No, you're going to be on the couch being like, quit beating me up, for God's sake. So yeah, there's no way your thyroid gland can work well and produce the thyroid hormones that your entire body needs, including your brain, if it's getting beaten up on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah. So what do you do in order for, after you get labs, let's say, and you find that the TSH is within normal range, because a lot of time, and there's always a debate about what's considered normal, first of all, right? So the American Academy of Endocrinology back in 2006 actually said that the cutoff should be 3.1, but there's lots of labs that have it up to 5 point whatever. And so the labs haven't altered their range despite recommendations by that academy. And so, but you can still get it and then just interpret it on your own by looking at the absolute value. But even if it is within the normal range, there are some people who don't know what their normal is. And generally, when I look at thyroid, thyroid labs, I like to get the TSH down to 1.0 without going under. At least that's my goal. And then we tweak it a little bit more. But even if you do that, with thyroid hormone, and like you said, there's T4 and T3, and there's combinations as well. There's combinations of T4 and T3, which I don't think we need to get into. But then even if you do that, sometimes the T4, free T4 and the free T3 don't respond to that.
Right.
Or the free T4 does respond, but it doesn't convert to free T3 as well. So
Right.
can you talk about what you do when those kinds of things happen?
Sure. So it's so unique. It's so individualized, but I
Yeah,
guess it's in general, right?
right,
So we have to go by those four important words that patients rarely hear. How do you feel?
right,
So we have to take into account your symptoms. So if your TSH is a 2.5, so I like it below a 2 as well. And I don't care if it gets suppressed if someone is on a medication, because that's just, yeah, the pituitary is sensing that everything is cool, so it's going to go down. If they're feeling fine and maybe the free T3 and free T4 isn't quite where we want it to be, but they are experiencing no symptoms. I have a woman right now. She's like, I'm fine. I'm fine. We have her on a little tiny bit of medication. We're doing dietary lifestyle changes, no symptoms whatsoever. I'm not going to touch it. I am not going to push her.
Yeah, why? There's no
higher.
reason. The benefits don't,
Right.
outweigh the risks. And I
Right.
mean, and there are risks to having somebody overcorrected. Some
Yep.
people, say, oh, I just have some heart palpitations once in a while and I have lots and lots of energy. And I like functioning that way, but there's risks to your bones, to your heart if you are overcorrected. So you really do want to make it in a very, very, very narrow, make it as good as you can without going over,
Right. And, I mean, in some cases we do have to, like you gave the example of they're not converting properly.
Right.
We have to find out why. So why isn't that T4 converting to T3? Why is the reverse T3 elevated in my functional world above a 12?
Right.
So we have to look at those factors, such as your iron status. If you're anemic, if your ferritin levels are low, ferritin will affect your hair, but it will also directly affect that T4 to T3 conversion.
Absolutely. Right.
Zinc, magnesium, selenium, iodine, estrogen, insulin, all of those come into play. So we have to look at all of those markers to see, is there something off there that is creating this conversion issue? Now, some people do have a genetic SNP. It's DIO1, DIO2, and it's virtually impossible to get it tested in this country. It's tested like every day in the UK. All my UK patients are like, yeah, I got this genetic test. I'm like, that's great. We can't get it over here. But if you have that SNP, then you just naturally don't convert very well. And we have to take that into account. But I don't have that on a lot of my patients in the US. So I'm reliant on looking at the other markers, fixing those. And then if someone is not converting, okay, we might need to use, supplemental medication, glandulars, whatever needs to be done in this case to help them, because the body still needs the T3.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So if they do have that SNP, and just so the audience knows, that SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's like a variation of a gene that could potentially slow things down in your body, or speed them up, but generally it's kind of slowing them down. So what do you do if they do have that SNP?
In that case, we do have to use some form of something with T3. So it could be a supplemental glandular that has T4 and T3 in it. It can be natural desiccated thyroid medication. That's T4 and T3. If someone is already on Synthroid like I was, and they're doing okay on it, they're not experiencing side effects from it, but they're just not converting, we might actually have to lower their T4 dose and add in a little bit of T3, because they're never, ever, ever going to get the T3 that they need because of their genetics. Now, that is the very last step. Let me clarify. We have to look at all those. I just listed a ton of factors: iron, selenium, iodine, zinc, D. I mean, we have to look at all of those other factors. So I don't want your listeners to think like, oh my God, I have this genetic SNP I need to find out about. No.
Exactly. I know people hone in on one little thing. So it's good. I'm really glad that you clarified on that. And same thing about, the T3 being low. I was like, oh my God, I got to get some compounded T3, and you can really, make things so much worse if you're not doing this in the right order and working with someone that's looking at the whole picture. So one of the things that you mentioned that needs to be looked at is iodine. And even within the functional medicine world, there's a lot of controversy about how to do, like, one, how to test that, two, how to what you do once you get results back. And can you talk about your experience with iodine and what you do if you find that that's like, how do you test, and then what you do with the results based on those that test?
Mm-hmm. So that's probably the most controversial topic in functional medicine. You will literally find functional medicine practitioners split down the middle, right? 50% on this side, 50% on that side. I have just actually recently really dove into the research on iodine, really looked at both sides, just from standing back and going, listen, I see your opinion. I see your opinion. Now give me the research. Let me dive in. And when we look at the research, we know that every cell, just like every cell in the body has a receptor site on it for T3, every cell needs iodine. Every single cell needs iodine. Right. And the way that T4 converts to T3 is with iodine.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
You can see where I'm going with this.
Yes.
We don't want low iodine levels, and we don't want you to avoid iodine out of fear or out of what you've heard. Like, I was talking to a brilliant scientist a few weeks ago, and we were kind of chatting about iodine because it's such a hot topic. And he said, in my practice, I have only ever pushed one person into a thyroid storm with iodine. It wasn't pretty, but one out of thousands. So I think that fear around Hashimoto's and iodine, and you're going to go hyper if you use it, is completely unwarranted. And there's always extremes, right? So when people poo-poo the iodine, they're looking at people who have used high doses. And I think that's where iodine got a bad rap. When we look back and we say, okay, there were thyroid practitioners that used incredibly high doses of iodine. Now, in some people, those high doses worked, and others, they had a bad reaction. They went hyper. Right. But we also have to look at history. World War II, soldiers would carry iodine for everything. It is antiviral, antifungal. It can heal a wound. You can rub it on your breasts and decrease your fibrocystic breasts. I mean, it's really good for pretty much everything, but it's about finding the right dose for you. Right. So I prefer to start people very, very low. I will start them at 6.25 or 12.5 milligrams. I like to use either iodoral or Lugol's, J-Crow Lugol solution.
2%, right?
2%. Yep. And I always have them do the salt loading protocol. So that's where you put Himalayan sea salt or Redmond's real salt in water, let it dissolve, stir it up, slam it down a couple times a day, and vitamin C for sure, because that's going to prevent that toxic effect from the iodine. But here's the thing. Whenever you do feel a little bit like icky, like you're going through a detox and you're taking iodine, it is binding to the bromide, fluoride, and chlorine that your body has been exposed to that damages your thyroid gland. It's binding to that and excreting it out of your body. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't like people feeling like garbage. So we do use the salt loading protocol, and we use vitamin C. And if they do start to experience a little bit of like icky symptoms, detox reactions, we just pull the iodine for a couple of days, and then we reintroduce it once it clears, and we can just kind of monitor. In some people, I will go up in the dose to 25. Some people go to 50, but that's very, very rare. That's Dr. Brownstein's work, where he tries to get people to 50 or 100 milligrams or micrograms. So not milligrams.
That's Dr. David Brownstein, right?
David Brownstein.
Yeah.
Yep. And so he was like kind of the original proponent of iodine. When you hear his work, he's in Michigan. He's in the Goiter Belt, just like I'm located in the Goiter Belt as well. And he had all these patients coming in to see him. They all had thyroid problems. He would test them just like we were talking about testing. They all had thyroid problems. So he was putting them on thyroid medication. But at some point he's like, why? Why are so many people experiencing thyroid problems? Why do I have to use thyroid medication so much? And then he started testing the iodine. Now, when you talk about, and found that they were low. So when he gave them iodine, a lot of them could cut down on their medication, come off of their medication, and their thyroid was really improved tremendously, even in the latter stages of Hashimoto's. Right. So when we test, now he likes to do the loading test. That's where you take 50 milligrams of iodine and you do a urine catch to see how much you're excreting. I find that that's just difficult to do because a lot of people don't have the 50 milligram and they have to order it. And then what if it doesn't work? Or what if they don't tolerate? Then they have a bottle of Ioderol sitting around. So I just honestly, I like to look at both serum and the 24-hour urine and just compare the two. Listen, if you're coming back with a big L next to your serum iodine, you're low.
Okay, exactly. You're low. No brainer. Yeah. So
right.
what's your cutoff on those tests, assuming like you're using LabCorp? At what point do you think, okay, you don't need iodine?
I mean, if somebody happens to come back at like 80, like 70, 80, I mean, that's fine. That's great. But if you're coming back at a 35, even a 42, and you're just right over the bottom cutoff, we're still going to use a low dose iodine just to kind of nudge you up more to the middle. I realize everybody uses different labs, especially if you have listeners in another country. So I'll frame it down into, you want to kind of be dead center of the iodine scale that they give you on your lab.
Right. Yeah. Great. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good discussion about iodine, and we covered it all, right?
It helps with depression. It does. It helps with mood.
Well, everything that you can do to optimize your thyroid will help with depression and anxiety and mental health issues. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time. So I really, really appreciate everything that you've talked about, Dr. Amie, and you're full of so much information at a depth that's really important, and providing a service to people who are really stuck, almost being gaslit by all sorts of other providers about how to make them feel better, like, it's my thyroid. No, it's not. It's like, yes, it is. No, it's not. Exactly. And just to really have someone out there who can, like you wrote in your bio, taking them by the hand and just telling them what they need to do, and very cookbook, approach that's individualized. Like, exactly. I shouldn't say cookbook. It's not really cookbook. It's like, what to do, all the different steps after you do a complete evaluation, and you really know your stuff. So I'm really glad you were able to, spend some time today talking about that.
Thank you. Me too. Yeah. I love educating. So
yeah. And so I know, how can we have people get in touch with you? I know you have a lab and symptom checklist that you can offer for people to check to see if they have the symptoms, and if they want to talk to you one-on-one, I know you provide a free discovery call, and that they can find you on Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to provide all of that information in the show notes that will come with the YouTube channel and episode, and also on the podcast. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's great.
Yeah. So thank you again. Take care.